She pulled the bone out of the frozen dirt, and it was warm. Not lukewarm, warm, like the creature had been breathing seconds ago. And it wasn't supposed to exist. Every textbook, museum, and wildlife series had agreed on one thing. The ancient giant ground sloths were extinct, long gone. Dead for 10,000 years, wiped out by shifting weather, rising oceans, and the collapse of the Ice Age ecosystems. But here, on a wind-blasted island above Siberia, a paleobiologist named Lena Dubrovsky was staring at a skull that shattered everything science thought it knew. And what she found next would drag the entire idea of extinction into question and unearth a secret that had been hidden under permafrost for over 4,000 years. The sloth she held had roamed the earth while the pyramids were already ancient history. While Abraham was trekking through Mesopotamia, while Bronze Age tribes were stacking stones into temples, this thing was stomping across a tundra island lost in time. Welcome to Sable Island, where extinction hit the snooze button and reality started glitching. This was the final stronghold of a species thought to be erased, and what happened here was far stranger than anything in a museum display. Picture a rugged slab of land the size of Delaware, floating like a forgotten lifeboat in the Arctic Ocean. That's Sable Island, 87 miles north of the Siberian coast, cloaked in thick fog and hammered by 140 miles per hour winds. It's like if someone took Alcatraz, removed the inmates, and locked up a prehistoric beast instead. And for 6,000 years after their cousins vanished from the rest of the planet, a tribe of shaggy, elephant-sized sloths made this their icy kingdom. When the Ice Age began to melt away 12,000 years ago, the seas rose and turned this former hilltop into a fortress of isolation. The sloths trapped here became castaways, adrift on a rocky outpost barely marked on maps. Maybe 500 of them, maybe 1,000 at their peak. That's less than the student body of your average high school. And they were the last of their kind. But here's where the story goes from rare to ridiculous. These weren't sickly remnants of a dying breed limping toward extinction. Bone chemistry, specifically isotope ratios, tells a completely different story. These sloths weren't just surviving, they were thriving. Think of isotopes as nature's version of a fitness tracker. And these creatures were basically running Ironmans. Nitrogen levels said they had full stomachs. Carbon readings showed no signs of starvation or stress. So, if they weren't starving or freezing, what wiped them out? For 6,000 years, they lived the way their ancestors had for 100,000 more, roaming the tundra steppe, walking ancient migration routes that now just led them in endless circles around their 2,900 square mile prison. Sable itself seemed like it had been built to keep them going. While the mainland turned into forests and wetlands, Sable stayed cold and dry, perfect sloth territory. Like a biological time capsule with no expiration date. Isolation comes with a cost, and for the last Arctic sloths, that cost stacked higher with every generation. When researchers finally cracked open the DNA from Sable Island's last survivors, what they uncovered flipped the entire extinction narrative upside down. These sloths weren't just the end of their kind. They were biological train wrecks on legs. Want to know how bad it got? Picture this. The super-sniffing snouts sloths had evolved over millions of years gone haywire. See, a sloth's nose isn't just a nose, it's like a muscle-packed detective device, with over 40,000 moving parts. Basically, a floppy, fuzzy Swiss Army knife that can sniff out fruit friends and danger from miles off. But the island sloths had scrambled the genetic code that controlled their scent receptors. Imagine waking up one day unable to smell coffee, chocolate, or garlic bread except in sloth terms. That meant total social collapse. They couldn't recognize family, couldn't tell who was safe, who was angry, or who was ready to mate. It was like the entire social media feed of sloth society had glitched out. A mother couldn't even smell her own baby. Males couldn't find the right females. The scent-based system that once organized sloth clans like clockwork, completely gone. And it didn't stop there. The chemicals in their pee used to mark turf and social rank had mutated too. Their chemical language turned from Shakespeare to nonsense. Total gibberish. And then came the weirdest part: fur. Their thick, warm, survival-grade coats were mutating into something more like silk pajamas. Picture an Ice Age tank wearing a Halloween costume. That's genomic meltdown. When you isolate a population long enough, random mutations pile up faster than evolution can delete them. Every new generation got a little glitchier than the last. But here's where the sable sloths threw science a curveball. Based on everything we know, they should have died off fast. That kind of DNA meltdown usually wipes species off the map in just a few hundred generations. It's like playing genetic Russian roulette, and somehow, these shaggy freaks kept winning for 6,000 years straight. Despite their social collapse, despite their broken noses and translucent winter wear, the sable sloths refused to quit. Over 200 generations, they kept going. The answer? It might be the prison that trapped them. Sable Island had no predators. No wolves, no big cats, not even a single hungry saber-tooth left. They didn't need sharp senses to stay alive. And food? Everywhere. Cold, hardy plants blanketed the island like a buffet. They didn't need to compete. In a way, the brutal Arctic landscape protected them. Their island was like a broken zoo enclosure with no zookeepers dangerous to everything else, but weirdly safe for them. Their mutations became nuisances instead of death sentences. But even a padded cell has a ticking clock. And here's where things get really strange. Genetic studies show that the sloths weren't slowly fading out. The worst mutations, the truly damaging ones, were being eliminated. That's right. They were winning their fight against DNA decay. After 6,000 years of genetic chaos, their DNA was actually stabilizing. The population was bouncing back, rebooting itself from the inside out. They had survived the worst of it, and they were healing, which makes what happened next all the more devastating. Around 4,000 years ago, something shifted on Sable Island. The bones from this era scream of environmental sabotage. Sulfur levels in the remains jump off the charts like a crime scene, where the ground itself is the murder weapon. Chemical clues suggest the landscape was turning against its last inhabitants. And once you hear what likely happened next, you'll understand why this extinction hit harder than any slow, sad fade-out. Picture this. The island's central ridges, once stable for eons, begin disintegrating. Rapid erosion, strange climate shifts, maybe storms that didn't follow any of the old patterns. Minerals locked in rock for millions of years start leaching into the freshwater supply. Toxic compounds flood the few streams and ponds the sloths relied on. For 6,000 years they had depended on this ecosystem, and suddenly their drinking water turned into poison. But that wasn't even the worst part. The likeliest culprit behind this spiral? Something deceptively harmless sounding. Rain on snow. Sounds soft, right? It's actually nature's equivalent of locking the fridge and throwing away the key. A freak winter storm dumps rain on a thick snowpack. That rain freezes on contact, sealing the ground under a shell of ice several inches thick. Vegetation that had fed these massive sloths for millennia was suddenly locked under frozen glass. And these weren't slow grazers, they needed constant feeding. Hundreds of pounds of plant matter daily. In just a few weeks, starvation would have spread like wildfire. This wasn't the final whimper of a dying lineage. This was a recovery, an epic comeback that got cut off mid-stride. And then the timeline hits you like a punch to the chest. Just a few centuries after the last giant sloth vanished, barely a blink in geological time, humans showed up. At a site called Kalaavik, on Sable Island's southern rim, Archaeologists found signs of Paleoarctic visitors. Around 3,600 years ago, people set up a temporary hunting camp there. They weren't there for sloths. The giants were already gone. These were not the sloth-slaying superpredators of prehistory. These folks hunted seabirds and seals. They carved harpoons from driftwood and ivory, camped in skin tents, and feasted on marine life. But they must have seen the bones. Imagine them wandering across the tundra, stumbling on skulls the size of beach balls, some still fresh enough to send a chill down your spine. To this day, the coastal Chukchi people tell of ancient northern giants. Maybe those stories began with sloth bones on the sand. The twist is brutal. If the sable sloths had held out just a few more centuries, they might have met humanity. And this time, not the kind with stone-tipped spears and hunger in their eyes. These seasonal visitors weren't even equipped to deal with large prey. It's not clear what would have happened. Maybe peaceful coexistence, maybe a second chance. But these creatures had already survived everything: genetic roulette, climate sabotage, isolation. And yet, they missed their shot at crossing paths with humans by what amounts to a cosmic rounding error. Coexistence missed by inches. That's how close it came. The final sloth bones recovered from Sable Island show no violence, no sickness, no slow fade. They just stop. One sediment layer holds their remains. The next holds nothing. Vanished. Recent data suggests there were only about 300 sloths left. Picture them, scattered across 2,900 square miles, completely unaware that they were carrying the full weight of an entire species' future. When collapse came, it moved faster than anything evolution could counter. The remains left behind on that frozen island aren't just bones. They're warnings. Warnings that small, isolated populations might endure long past expectations, but they're always one step away from total disaster. The sable sloths teach us that extinction doesn't always arrive with warning signs. Sometimes it hits like a trapdoor. More than anything, these creatures show that survival isn't a math equation. It's not about big numbers or perfectly mixed genes. It's about timing, luck, chaos. One freak weather event that was all it took to erase them after 6,000 years of holding on. Today, Sable Island is a wildlife stronghold again, but for different animals. It now has the densest population of Arctic foxes on Earth. Polar bears use it as a nursery. Walruses sunbathe on the same beaches where sloths once thundered past. The land that guarded the final chapter of the sloth story still protects life at the edge of survival. A strange, beautiful reminder that even the loneliest places can hide stories beyond belief. And somewhere beneath that permafrost, more bones lie waiting. Each one, a frozen time capsule from a lost world. A world where the unbelievable was normal and extinction came not with a bang, but a quiet silence on the wind. Where the last of the ancient giants wandered beneath northern skies, carrying 5 million years of evolution in their cracked DNA and glitching bodies. The final sloth died alone, on a barren patch of tundra 4,000 years ago. But here's the part that still sticks with me. That sloth had no idea it was the last one. It probably spent its final hours doing what sloths had always done, munching on frozen roots, calling out to kin who would never answer, and living like tomorrow was a sure thing. And maybe that's the most human thing about the whole story.